It was a quiet Sunday, July 13th, 2025, in the suburban calm of Southend-on-Sea. The air was still, the sky gently overcast, and the streets near London Southend Airport were starting their routine, slow footsteps to the bakery, children heading to the park, couples taking their early morning walks. Just before 9 a.m., a low humming sound grew in volume. Many looked up, as they always did. It was common to see light aircraft training overhead, small, familiar silhouettes tracing arcs above the rooftops. But what happened next would turn that gentle hum into terror. In a matter of seconds, that aircraft, a twin-engine training plane belonging to a private aviation school, nosedived out of control. It crashed just beyond the airport perimeter, slicing through the corner of a nearby residential building and exploding into flames. In moments, the lives of 3 residents, 2 trainee pilots, and an instructor changed, or ended, forever. Within hours, the story would travel across England. Within days, it would raise questions that refused to stay grounded.
What caused
the crash? Who was responsible? Were regulations followed or ignored? This documentary doesn't just retrace the flight. It listens to the echoes that followed. At precisely 8:52 a.m., the control tower at London Southend Airport received a distress signal. The aircraft, a Piper PA-31 Navajo, had experienced a sudden loss of power in one engine during ascent. Were 2 student pilots in their final weeks of training and their instructor, a former Royal Air Force veteran. Just moments before the engine failure, the plane had taken off without any indication of mechanical concern. It was meant to be a routine circuit flight. Witnesses on the ground described the aircraft as sputtering, dipping unnaturally and turning awkwardly. Instead of circling back to the runway, the plane veered sharply, attempting what appeared to be an emergency landing on a nearby open field, but it was too low. It clipped the upper floor of a 2-story residential building and exploded on impact. Flames burst outward. Black smoke engulfed the block, and sirens screamed across Southend. Emergency services arrived within 5 minutes, pulling survivors from the wreckage: a teenager with burns, an elderly couple, dazed but conscious, and 2 children whose mother had perished in the crash. The 3 on board were declared dead at the scene. The crash site was cordoned off, residents evacuated, and the questions began. By midday, the neighborhood near the crash site was eerily silent. Police vans, fire trucks, and hazmat units formed barriers around the rubble. Television cameras arrived by noon. Headlines started appearing. Training flight ends in tragedy. Southend crash claims lives. Residents demand answers. Local residents gathered at a distance, many visibly shaken. Children cried. Parents held hands tightly. For them, the sound of aircraft had always been background noise. No, it was unbearable. A nearby primary school was shut down for 2 days due to safety concerns. Streets were blocked. Families in adjacent homes were relocated to temporary housing. But amid the chaos, one thing stood out: the silence from authorities. The Civil Aviation Authority released a 2-sentence statement acknowledging the crash. The airport's operator offered condolences, but there was no press conference, no detailed update. And for the families who had lost everything, that silence was louder than the sirens had ever been. In the days that followed, whispers turned to headlines. Residents began sharing their concerns with local reporters. They'd filed complaints before about noise, about low-flying aircraft, about what they called reckless training drills. One local counselor admitted he had received multiple letters about airspace violations from residents near the airport. "We were told it was safe," one woman said. "We trusted them." A retired aviation engineer living just 3 blocks from the crash told reporters that model of plane isn't even ideal for that type of circuit training anymore. It's dated, maintenance-heavy, risk-prone. His comments added pressure on both the training school and the airport authority, yet no one responded, as online forums and local news picked up the story. Social media trended with hashtags: hashtag Southend crash, hashtag skyrights, hashtag too low too often. What began as mourning began to feel like mobilization. By July 15th, students from South Essex College began organizing a memorial outside the crash site. They brought flowers, candles, and handwritten letters. A large white sheet was nailed to Offense, and Pattersby wrote messages on it in black marker. Gone too soon. We heard you fall. This should never happen again. The families of the victims attended in silence. The father of one of the students on the plane could not speak. He simply placed his son's photo on the wall and walked away. Photo of a young man in uniform, smiling hopeful, appeared on the cover of 3 newspapers the next day. The community began to demand more. Residents sent formal letters to the airport. Student groups began planning a vigil. What had started as grief was turning into organized accountability. The air accidents. Investigation Branch AIB announced an inquiry. But the process, they explained, would be long, perhaps 6 months to a year. The black box was retrieved, but initial details were not made public. Frustration grew. Local MPs were pressed to act, and one tabled an urgent question in Parliament: are our towns safe under training flight paths? At the same time, the aviation school responsible for the flight paused operations. Their spokesperson gave a brief interview stating, "We will cooperate fully." But to many, the words rang hollow. A former instructor from the same school contacted a news outlet anonymously. "We flagged issues before. Budget cuts affected maintenance. Corners were cut. People knew," he said. These revelations ignited public anger. The story was no longer just a local tragedy. It was national. As institutional responses stalled, students took the lead. At South Essex College, university groups held open discussions, film screenings, and awareness sessions about air safety. Near urban centers, what began as quiet gatherings soon became more vocal demonstrations. Posters began to appear across campus and on town hall boards: "Who watches the sky? Lives above profits. One crash too many." The movement wasn't driven by anger alone. It was driven by an aching need for recognition that those who lived near runways, under training paths, and beside small-town airports deserved more than sympathy after tragedy. They deserved protection before it. Students coordinated a peaceful march from the college gates to the crash site. Hundreds joined, some carried placards, others simply walked in silence. It was a march for answers, for transparency, for change. We didn't lose a friend, a classmate, or a mother just to move on, one speaker said at the vigil. We lost them because systems failed. We cannot let silence be the next failure. Mainstream media soon turned its focus on Southend. Documentaries, panel discussions, and opinion pieces filled the airwaves. One BBC feature titled "Low Skies, High Risks" explored how densely populated zones like Southend-on-Sea faced repeated risks from training aircraft, often without residents even knowing. Several national journalists uncovered startling trends. A rise in near-miss incidents in recent years, lax regulation for light aircraft training routes, underfunded maintenance schedules at private flight schools. The training institution at the center of the Southend crash had a record of 3 technical delays in the previous year. None were made public. No, they were front-page headlines. Every revelation stoked the call for change, and every silence from officials added fuel to public frustration. 3 families. Those who lost loved ones inside the building and in the aircraft joined together to form a legal alliance. With help from advocacy groups, they released a joint statement. "We are not just grieving, we're demanding answers. We want to know what happened, why it happened, and who allowed it to happen." One father, holding back tears on live television, said, "They told us these aircraft were safe. They told us this neighborhood was fine, but my daughter didn't come home. And no one told me why." The family's lawyers requested flight logs, maintenance records, audio transcripts from air traffic control, and past safety audits. The fight was no longer just emotional. It was legal, systematic, determined. By the 3rd week after the crash, the pressure reached Parliament. Lawmakers debated a new proposal for the Urban Air Safety and Transparency Bill, aimed at creating stricter buffer zones between training airspaces and residential zones. Mandatory disclosure of maintenance logs for training aircraft real-time, tracking transparency for all low-altitude flights over suburban regions. The bill passed its first reading. largely due to public pressure. It wasn't just Southend-on-Sea anymore. Other towns near small airports began to speak up. Emails flooded MPs' inboxes. Town halls began calling emergency sessions. What happened in Southend was no longer seen as an isolated event. It was a mirror to a systemic flaw. Exactly 30 days after the crash, a permanent memorial was placed at the site. Engraved in dark stone were the names of the 6 lives lost: the instructor, the 2 students, the mother, the young girl, and the elderly tenant. Below them, an inscription read, "They fell from the sky, not by fate, but by fault. We remember. We demand. We change." The aviation school permanently closed. Its license was suspended pending further investigation. Local officials proposed relocating training routes farther from populated zones. And at South Essex College, a new scholarship was launched in the names of the 2 student pilots, young men who took to the sky with dreams, not knowing it would be their final flight. Today, the streets of Southend still carry the sound of passing planes. But every time one flies low, people look up, they listen, they remember. In the quiet that follows tragedy, we often ask ourselves, what now? In Southend-on-Sea, the answer didn't come from silence. It came from voices, soft, grieving, insistent. Voices that refused to be ignored. They asked for answers. They demanded reform. And in doing so, they reminded us all that safety is not a privilege, it is a right. And no life, no home, no future should be the cost of ignoring it. This was not just a crash. It was a call. We're still listening.